Chosen one. The courtroom isn't the place where truth is born. It is the exact place where lies go to die. Buckle up, because what you are about to hear is not just your average inheritance dispute. This is a scandal that plays out more like an intense television drama than a standard legal battle. Did you know that nearly 70% of inheritance fights end with family members accusing one another of fraud, theft, or manipulation? Yet in your situation, that statistic looks like child's play next to the absolute chaos that actually unfolded. This was never just about splitting up assets or reading a will over tea and biscuits. No. This was an all-out war heavily disguised as paperwork. It was a family feud that dragged more corruption into the light than a corrupt politician's secret diary. Your inheritance case was not filled with polite disagreements and friendly smiles. It was filled with receipts, pure resilience, and the kind of steadfast patience that would make even angels roll their eyes and mutter that the suspense is finally over. Every relative, every attorney, and every snake hiding in the grass truly believed you were finished. They fully expected you to fold under the immense pressure. Instead, the very evidence they tried so hard to bury started digging up their own graves. Criminal charges are circling them right now like vultures, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to feast. And here's the greatest irony of all. They thought they were just fighting over property and land. But what you actually inherited was untouchable strength, ancestral justice, and a front-row seat to their total downfall. If karma had its own comedy special, your enemies just wrote the entire script. Stay locked in, because this isn't just a closed case. It is an entire case fully exposed. Number 1. You didn't just win the case, you turned the courtroom into a mirror. You didn't merely walk away with a victory in this inheritance battle. You turned the entire courtroom into a glaring mirror that absolutely no one wanted to look to. What happened wasn't simply a judge stamping a final verdict in your favor. It was the naked truth standing boldly in front of everyone who had spent years dressing it up in lies. They confidently walked into that room believing they could easily manipulate the outcome, twist the narrative, and buy their way into influence. But the beautiful thing about the truth is that it doesn't even need a lawyer. It simply needs time. And in that room, time finally caught up with every single deception they tried to hide. Your massive victory didn't come from your wealth, connections, or charm. It came from something that unsettled them deeply, which is exposure. Every single argument, document, and piece of testimony wasn't just court evidence. It was a crystal clear reflection of exactly who they were. The courtroom quickly became less about you defending your rightful inheritance, and much more about them being forced to sit and watch their own greed, hypocrisy, and corruption be projected for the whole world to see. It is one thing to lose a legal case, but it is entirely different to lose the fake facade you have been hiding behind for years. That is exactly what your family, your rivals, and even certain corrupt officials experienced during that trial. The very place they believed they could control completely became the stage that broadcasted their inner rot. And here's the part that made it utterly unbearable for them. You didn't even have to play dirty or overperform. All you had to do was stand completely firm and let the heavy weight of the truth do all the lifting. This is exactly why your victory rattled them so deeply. It wasn't about the inheritance or the property. It was about what the entire case dragged into the light. The courtroom exposed who was truly driven by selfish greed and who was standing firmly on rightful, solid ground. It highlighted who tried to weaponize lies and who held the undeniable proof. By the time the final verdict was read aloud, the actual assets felt almost secondary because the heavy damage was already done. Reputations were completely shredded, masks fell off, and relationships that once pretended to be built on loyalty or family ties were exposed as nothing more than cold business deals hidden behind fake smiles. That is exactly why your win hits differently. You didn't just walk away with your inheritance. You walked away after forcing everyone to face themselves in a mirror they simply cannot break, no matter how hard they try. Number 2. The victory wasn't in the papers, it was in the bloodlines. The true weight of this massive inheritance case isn't found in the assets or the money. What you actually won goes so much deeper than numbers printed on a page or property titles handed over in court. You successfully restored something that was stolen, not just from you personally, but from your entire bloodline. For many years, and perhaps even for generations, greedy hands were reaching in, actively rewriting your history, crossing names out, and twisting sacred legacies to benefit people who never had a rightful claim. When you stood up to fight and eventually won, you weren't just securing physical property. You were powerfully pulling your family's rightful name out of the dark shadows where others tried to bury it permanently. This is exactly why your victory feels so incredibly unsettling to those who lost. Because the second that verdict came down, it wasn't only you standing a little taller. It was every single ancestor who had ever been wronged. It was every silenced voice and every rightful heir who was cruelly erased from their own family story. You became the living, breathing proof that their erasure was only temporary. You proved that destiny has an amazing way of circling back around to reclaim exactly what belongs to it. They weren't simply fighting you inside that courtroom. They were actively fighting the massive weight of history trying to correct itself. And that is a battle absolutely no one can ever win. Here is what makes this so incredibly powerful. Your inheritance was never just a random pile of assets. It was an entire identity. The wealth, the land, and the rights attached to your name are powerful symbols of belonging, deep-rootedness, and an undeniable connection. When those people tried to block you, what they were truly trying to say was that you did not belong. Yet, by winning, you flipped their lie into a massive spotlight that showcased their own fraud. In the end, the court didn't just validate your rightful claim, it completely invalidated theirs. That is exactly why this victory matters so deeply. Money can always be spent, and property can easily be sold, but restoring a rightful, undeniable bloodline is truly priceless. They desperately wanted to erase your rightful place in the story, but now they are the ones being written out as nothing more than frauds, manipulators, and thieves. This inheritance case was never about personal gain for you. It was about full recovery. It was about firmly taking back what was already yours, what was permanently tied to your name long before you were even born. And now that it has been fully restored, you haven't just secured it for yourself. You have proudly reestablished it for all the generations coming after you. Number 3. Criminal charges loading is not karma. It is evidence finally surfacing. The criminal charges that are currently circling your enemies are not the result of some mystical idea of karma. They are the direct, unavoidable result of the evidence finally coming to the surface. For years, these individuals truly thought they could safely bury their crimes under thick layers of intimidation, heavy silence, and carefully constructed lies. They walked around with the sheer arrogance of people who genuinely believed they would never be held accountable for their actions. But this inheritance case completely cracked open the very ground they were standing on. Everything that was hidden began leaking out into the open. And suddenly, the exact same tricks they used to cheat you are now being used to build a massive criminal case against them. They honestly thought this was just about getting money. They firmly believed that if they lied enough, forged enough documents, and manipulated enough people, they could walk away untouchable and richer. What they completely failed to realize is that lies are never actually free. They always leave a very clear trail. Every single fake document, shady witness, and backroom deal they orchestrated is now sitting as hard evidence in the hands of serious investigators. The courtroom didn't just figure out who got the inheritance money. It also perfectly set the stage for the law to finally catch up with the people who broke it. This is exactly what makes your victory so incredibly powerful. Winning the case was never just about securing what was yours. It was about totally shaking the entire corrupt structure surrounding it. They fully expected you to just give up, settle out of court, or crumble under their immense pressure. But by bravely standing your ground, you forced absolutely everything into the blinding light. Now, the exact same lawyers, judges, and authorities they assumed would protect them are the ones heavily scrutinizing their every move. The thick walls they built for their own protection are now quickly closing in on them instead. The phrase criminal charges loading is not just an exaggeration. It is harsh reality loudly knocking on their front door. The very system they tried so hard to exploit has totally flipped on them. What is coming next for them is not just payback from the universe. It is severe justice from the exact legal channels they tried to twist and use against you. Their own greed has done the one specific thing they swore they would always avoid. It exposed their deep corruption in ways they can no longer clean up or deny. And here is the deeper, more profound truth. This outcome was never optional. When you bravely fight for what is rightfully yours and completely refuse to bow down, the truth will always find a way to climb straight out of the dark pit it was thrown into. Your enemies thought they were clever enough to keep it buried forever. Now, they are waking up to the reality that what is loading for them isn't just shame or public embarrassment. It is real prison time, severe legal consequences, and a permanent, ugly stain on their family name. Number 4. The case was rigged against you until the rigging snapped. They built their entire case against you exactly like a fragile house of cards, shored up with dirty favors, propped up by fake signatures, and painted over with highly polished lies. Every single move they made was carefully aimed at convincing the court and anyone else watching that their twisted version of history was the only one that actually mattered. They leaned heavily on their relationships, whispered secrets in dark corridors, and treated the actual rules like mere suggestions. And for a little while, it actually worked, until it didn't. What they completely failed to account for was just how incredibly brittle their entire construction really was. The more garbage they piled on, like bribes to clerks, heavily coached witnesses, and doctored paperwork, the more immense pressure they created right inside their own shady scheme. You didn't beat them by trying to outplay their trickery. You beat them by simply exposing the total instability of everything they had relied upon. Corruption only survives on invisibility. It desperately needs gaps in scrutiny, people willing to look the other way, and a long series of tiny compromises that eventually add up into a massive mountain of wrongdoing. That is exactly how they operated, using tiny dishonesties, with each one making the very next one slightly easier. But when someone firmly insists on following the actual facts instead of the rumors, those tiny dishonesties suddenly start to look like a very clear trail. And that trail led straight back to the very people who thought they were completely untouchable. Once the small cracks started showing, every desperate attempt they made to plug them only made the final collapse that much louder. The paperwork that was supposed to easily prove their false narrative ended up contradicting it entirely. The witnesses they carefully coached began stumbling over their own rehearsed stories. The favors they handed out quickly became hard evidence of their true motive. The final snap wasn't dramatic in a cinematic way. It was highly methodical. One exposed lie quickly forced a second one into the light. A contradicted testimony immediately invited deep scrutiny of a fake document, and a highly suspicious transfer demanded a full audit. Investigators and judges do not normally act on mere suspicion alone, but they absolutely act when a clear pattern emerges. The very system they tried to corrupt actually has built-in checks that are slow, frustrating, and imperfect. But when the evidence finally lines up, those checks fully engage. You didn't need flashy fireworks. You just needed the relentless, steady accumulation of the truth. What truly terrifies people who rely on graft is not the thought of losing money. It is losing the comfortable illusion of control. That illusion is what kept them feeling safe for a while. But when it finally shattered, they discovered something far worse than just defeat, which is total visibility. Your incredible tenacity turned their cozy, secret backroom deals into permanent public records. Their alliances, which were once their protective armor, now read exactly like a criminal list of suspects. In the very end, the rigging didn't fail just because they were sloppy or greedy, even though they definitely were. It failed because someone absolutely refused to accept their fake narrative and fiercely demanded the proof. You were that firm refusal. The collapse was simply the natural consequence. And now the only thing left for them to do is stand back and watch the very evidence they thought was buried forever pull them completely under. Number 5. The will they forged became the rope that hung them. They desperately tried to erase your rightful name by inventing a document that never actually existed, signing names of people who never signed, and spinning a wild story beautifully polished to look official. Forging a legal will is the ultimate act of desperation, and desperation always leaves clear fingerprints. Those counterfeit pages were entirely meant to be the final nail in your claim, the airtight proof that would let them completely rewrite history and close the book on your rightful place. Instead, every single falsified line became a loose thread that, when finally pulled, completely unraveled everything they had built. Forgeries always carry their own unique language. Handwriting that doesn't quite match up, paper that doesn't age the exact same way, and ink that reacts very differently under intense scrutiny. These might seem like tiny details, but in a strict legal setting, those small details mean absolutely everything. The individuals who forged the will simply assumed their dirty work would quietly blend into the background noise. They completely forgot that modern investigations have sophisticated methods that make that noise listen. Brilliant forensic examiners, auditors, and even one stubborn clerk, who happened to remember some oddities, started actively comparing the dates, signatures, and margins. Those tiny, seemingly insignificant inconsistencies formed a perfect map leading right back to their front doors. Even worse for them, their terrible forgery demanded an explanation. Every single fake detail needed a backstory as to why that specific lawyer was used, why the document magically appeared on that exact day, and who exactly introduced it into the official file. Their frantic attempts to manufacture a believable chain of custody just created more points of contact like emails, phone calls, and favors that could all be easily traced. Every single person they involved quickly became just another witness who could potentially contradict the official tale. The harder they tried to make their massive lie look natural, the more incredibly unnatural it became. When the court finally ordered deep investigations, the forged will completely stopped being a helpful tool and instantly started being damning evidence. Professional laboratories testified about the papers and inks. Bank records successfully tracked all the highly unusual transfers. Phone logs fully revealed the secret conversations meant to coordinate their massive deceit. All of those elements combined into a very clear pattern that prosecutors instantly recognize as planning, intent, and concealment. Forgery is never an isolated sin. It is a long trail of highly deliberate acts, and law enforcement always follows the trails. The absolute most brutal part for them was that the exact thing they used to forcefully remove you from your own legacy became the very legal noose tightening firmly around their necks. What they truly thought would secure their fake claim instead provided the exact proof of their criminal behavior. The exact same signatures they hoped would silence you forever became the signatures that aggressively demanded real answers. The will they illegally forged literally turned into the rope that hung them because it highlighted exactly what they were willing to do just to win. In the end, forging a will isn't a clever move. It is highly combustible. It looks incredibly solid right until someone strikes a match by asking a simple question, ordering an audit, or pulling a lab report. That match has finally been struck, and their fake manufactured document is now the undeniable permanent record of their very own undoing. Number 6, you inherited more than wealth. You inherited the right to rewrite history. What you ultimately gained from that final verdict goes so far beyond physical property deeds and bank accounts. When your good name was properly restored, something much heavier and much more permanent shifted in the atmosphere. You successfully reclaimed the narrative that other people had been falsely rewriting for many years. Families all have histories, and those specific histories are very often edited by whoever happens to be holding the pen. People with money and influence can easily trash a good reputation, erase important names, and manufacture completely fake versions of events that eventually become the accepted story. By winning this battle, you didn't just reclaim your physical assets, you completely reclaimed authorship over what your family actually represented, who your ancestors truly were, and what their amazing legacy actually means. That specific kind of power entirely changes how all future conversations will happen. Official records that once proudly carried the dirty fingerprints of opportunists and liars are now being legally corrected. Important footnotes are being added, and the ugly lies that once circulated safely in whispers are quickly being replaced with hard, documented truth. The massive legal victory forcefully compels institutions to update their files, forces banks to reverse their transactions, and makes registries properly acknowledge the rightful ownership. Those are the highly practical changes. But the much larger, profound shift is cultural. The very people who used to whisper your name with a nasty sneer now have to fully reckon with a completely different reality. Social memory, family tales, and schools of thought will finally begin to reflect the beautiful truth you fought so hard for. Restoring your rightful place also naturally creates a new kind of powerful leverage and responsibility. With the official title comes the absolute right to demand transparency in the very places where dark secrecy once thrived. You can confidently ask for public records, audits, and verified accounts. You can firmly insist that false narratives be immediately corrected in the exact same spaces where the lies were initially spread. That kind of authority is never purchased. It is deeply earned through immense struggle, and it carries heavy weight. When a distant relative or a future historian looks back, they will easily find rock-solid proof instead of a nasty rumor, a rightful inheritance instead of a dirty theft, and a proud lineage that has been actively reclaimed rather than quietly and sadly lost. This is exactly why your massive win feels so seismic. It completely rewrites who deserves the credit and who must take the blame. It aggressively forces those who built their comfortable privilege on lies and distortion to formally admit on paper and inside a courtroom exactly what they did. The symbolic, beautiful inheritance you fully secured now acts just like a moral and legal ledger, something all future generations can confidently point to and declare that the record was successfully corrected. That vital correction perfectly protects your own descendants from the exact same erasure and gives them a much clearer, stronger starting point than you were ever given. In short, you walked away with so much more than mere possessions. You proudly walked away with the absolute right to correct history. That incredible right will easily outlast any temporary advantage, any house, and any check your opponents truly thought they had. It is the specific kind of inheritance that properly shapes identity and fully secures the truth for everyone who comes right after you. Number 7. Their greed proved that family was the first battlefield. Greed has an incredibly efficient way of stripping away people's masks, and in your specific case, it revealed something that most people are simply not prepared to ever face, which is the harsh reality that blood ties absolutely do not guarantee loyalty. The massive inheritance battle wasn't really about the physical assets at all. It was deeply about exposing the incredibly uncomfortable truth that the very first place betrayal often hides is right inside the family. Complete outsiders might envy you, and your competitors might constantly try to block your path. But absolutely nothing cuts deeper than finally realizing the very people who should have proudly stood beside you were the exact ones secretly plotting against you. The entire courtroom just became the public stage where this hidden, ugly war surfaced. And ultimately winning it didn't just firmly secure what was already yours. It aggressively forced everyone to clearly see what family truly meant when it was severely tested by greed. The painful deception you faced was so much sharper because it came straight from the people who knew all your vulnerabilities. They had full access to your personal story, your deepest weaknesses, and the kind of intimate knowledge that only family members carry. That unrestricted access made their awful betrayal highly calculated and almost surgical. Instead of proudly defending your shared legacy right alongside you, they willingly turned themselves into your biggest opposition. They desperately wanted your total erasure, not just from the financial inheritance, but from the very narrative of belonging itself. That is exactly why the fierce fight felt like so much more than just pushing legal documents. It was an all-out battle for your identity. But here is exactly what your massive victory did. It completely shattered the comfortable illusion that family is automatically a sacred thing. By soundly beating them, you proved definitively that blood alone absolutely does not define kinship. Truth does. Loyalty does. Honor does. Some people might share your DNA, but they definitely do not share your integrity. And the second greed entered the equation, they loudly revealed exactly where they stood. You winning the case forcefully made the world see the clear fracture lines between those who blindly fought for lies and those who proudly stood for what was actually right. The resulting fallout is so much bigger than just a simple property division. Your massive win completely redraws the true meaning of family. It clearly shows that survival sometimes absolutely means protecting yourself, even from the people who happen to share your last name. It proves that home is not necessarily where you are born, but exactly where true loyalty lives. And it beautifully shows that severe betrayal from within doesn't ever have to define your bright future, because you boldly stood up to it and completely overcame it. In the very end, the inheritance was never just a prize. It was a powerful revelation. Greed effectively turned your family into a chaotic battlefield. But your fierce persistence turned that exact battlefield into solid proof. Proof that a true family isn't ever measured by a simple bloodline, but by consistent actions. And your epic win carved that vital lesson into history with absolute, undeniable clarity. Number 8. You didn't just prove you belonged, you proved they never did. They fought so incredibly hard to completely cut you out that they accidentally handed you the exact proof you so desperately needed. Every single forged signature, every frantic phone call, and every hurried cover-up was a glaring admission, they wanted it to be or not, that their weak claim had absolutely no real foundation. Their entire strategy was deeply built on just pretending to have legitimacy, creating fake documents, coaching lying witnesses, and spinning elaborate stories meant to look incredibly convincing. But the more frantic energy they invested in making their ugly lie believable, the more glaringly obvious it became that their specific version of events was a cheap construction, not the truth. When someone is truly desperate to erase another human being, they quickly start inventing alternate realities. They happily produce altered versions of the past that highly flatter themselves. They carelessly retrofit important timelines to their own advantage, and they always speak with the absolute certainty of people who fully expect no one to ever check their work. But that specific kind of certainty only ever works if there is total silence surrounding it. Your bold refusal to be quiet aggressively forced heavy scrutiny, and scrutiny always reveals exactly what rehearsed, fake narratives try to hide. Their fake certainty quickly began to crack under intense examination because it was never actually backed by hard facts, only by their desperate wish that the facts would somehow disappear. The courtroom doesn't merely sort between what is right and what is wrong. It perfectly sorts between authentic, real history and cheaply manufactured stories. Every single time a tiny detail they heavily relied on didn't hold up, it loudly exposed a massive gap they simply couldn't explain. A lying witness who had been coached severely faltered. A fake document that had been sneakily inserted late showed clear signs of heavy tampering. A massive bank transfer completely couldn't be justified. All of those gaps are definitely not neutral. They point directly to their dark intention. You never even needed to invent reasons for people to distrust them. Their very own shady actions did all of that for you. Their frantic attempts to completely disinherit you ultimately revealed a much deeper, profound truth. They were never actually heirs in any meaningful, real sense of the word. They were nothing but greedy opportunists desperately trying to bend reality entirely to their will. The more they viciously attacked your solid right to belong, the more they completely revealed their own true role as fake imposters. In trying so hard to erase your rightful presence, they actively laid out a massive trail of deceit that traced straight back to them and literally nowhere else. That clear trail quickly turned mere suspicion into solid evidence and ugly smears into full admissions. By the time the final verdict officially arrived, it wasn't just that you had been beautifully validated. It was that their entire claim had been completely delegitimized. Your good name was proudly restored, not because you shouted the absolute loudest, but simply because their fake case couldn't possibly stand up to an honest, thorough inspection. That amazing outcome does something much deeper than merely settle property disputes. It completely clears the official record. It clearly shows all future generations who truly belonged and who absolutely didn't. Their massive effort to erase you ended up being the absolute clearest proof that their fake position was never, ever legitimate. Your massive victory, therefore, is not merely a retrieval of stolen assets. It is the absolute judicial unmasking of the exact people who pretended to be rightful heirs, but were, in real truth, total frauds. Number 9. This victory redefined what justice looks like. Justice has nearly always been described as completely blind, but your specific case perfectly showed that it can also be incredibly stubborn, quite messy, and painfully slow. For absolutely anyone watching this from the outside, the massive inheritance battle was perfect proof of exactly how distorted the entire legal system can become when heavy influence, big money, and dark manipulation are actively in play. The opposition constantly treated justice exactly like a cheap tool, something to bend, deliberately stall, and harshly weaponize. They heavily used annoying delay tactics, completely fake evidence, and very shady connections to desperately try to tilt the scales in their favor. At certain times, it truly must have looked as though the system was never going to properly recognize the actual truth. But exactly what unfolded through your fierce fight completely changed that negative perception. Your incredible victory absolutely didn't happen because the legal system was somehow flawless. It happened because deep corruption totally collapsed under the immense, crushing pressure of the undeniable truth. There always comes a specific point where even the absolute most carefully arranged lies simply cannot withstand public exposure. The heavily forged wills, the entirely fraudulent claims, and the heavily manipulated testimonies weren't just highly suspicious, they were completely unsustainable. One glaring contradiction quickly led straight to another, and the massive cracks in their fake story widened until the entire ugly structure fell completely apart. What you successfully accomplished wasn't simply winning a standard case. You violently forced justice to finally show its real, true face. Not blind, not completely neutral, but actively and fiercely cutting straight through the thick fabric of lies that desperately tried to suffocate it. That is exactly what makes this incredible victory completely redefine justice. It was never about a neat, idealistic courtroom scene where the truth calmly and quietly rose to the top. It was entirely about a very grueling, harsh process where the truth had to viciously fight for every single inch of ground. It clearly showed that justice is definitely not some neat, completely untouchable concept. It is fiercely forged in deep conflict, highly sharpened by stubborn persistence, and beautifully revealed only when someone absolutely refuses to be silenced. And in your specific case, that someone was you. Now, for absolutely everyone watching, the true meaning of justice completely shifts. It isn't just a basic system of laws. It is rock-solid proof that corruption actually has its limits. It clearly shows that lies may occasionally delay justice, but they can absolutely never erase it. It proves that when good people stand entirely firm, even incredibly broken systems can be forcefully bent straight toward the truth. And it perfectly shows that true justice isn't simply about simple punishment or simple reward. It is deeply about restoring balance. It is about permanently rewriting the official record so that the truth is no longer buried under a mountain of manipulation. Your incredible case beautifully redefined justice by strongly reminding everyone that the truth absolutely does not need anyone's permission to exist. It only needs fierce persistence to finally rise. And once it absolutely rises, even the most highly corrupted system in the world cannot possibly keep it from fully breaking through. Number 10. The estate wasn't the prize, the unmasking was. The physical estate itself was never actually the real victory. It was merely the public stage where all the ugly truths that had been quietly whispered in dark rooms were violently forced straight into the bright daylight. The houses, the large plots of land, the massive bank accounts, those are exactly what normal people name when they openly talk about an inheritance, but they are ultimately completely replaceable. What you truly took back is far less fungible. You fully expose the terrible people who built their entire lives on deep deception and made their fake lives highly visible to absolutely everyone who mattered. That total unmasking permanently changes relationships, solid reputations, and real power in ways that mere money never possibly could. When those exact people who plotted against you truly thought they were firmly securing a legacy, they were actually busily creating the exact evidence that would quickly dismantle theirs entirely. Every single forged signature, each highly coached witness, and every quiet phone call meant to heavily smooth the path completely away from you, quickly turned into a massive public record of their dirty methods. The exact moment those shady actions had to be officially explained in front of serious judges, court clerks, and sometimes even the pressing media, the entire dark operation completely lost its cover. Exactly what they deeply relied on, like dark secrecy, dirty leverage, and pure fear, instantly became the solid proof of their dark intent. That is exactly why the massive fallout matters so much more than the physical assets. Property can easily be sold, quickly transferred, or heavily taxed away. A completely revealed character stain perfectly follows a person forever. Neighbors who once politely nodded at them now clearly see the ugly pattern. Their business partners carefully reconsider their ongoing deals. Distant relatives quickly change exactly whom they choose to trust. The public unmasking completely rewrites the social currency highly in your favor and utterly bankrupts theirs. It also totally rewires the exact story people will tell about your family for many generations. Where once there may have been nothing but muttered lies or very convenient omissions, there is now a highly documented, solid record that perfectly supports the truth you proudly stood for. That deeply matters because those stories shape exactly who gets bright opportunities and who completely gets shut out. You didn't just win a basic legal battle, you completely shifted the cultural ledger, and the deep psychological impact is absolutely huge. Those greedy people who desperately tried to take from you now walk away fully knowing their dirty methods are completely on display. They must forever live with the harsh realization that their cheap tactics can be easily traced, publicly explained, and harshly judged. That constant fear is far more disabling than absolutely any lost financial asset because it severely limits their future moves. Meanwhile, you proudly inherit deep clarity and massive authority, the rock-solid moral high ground that easily convinces helpful allies, serious courts, and entire communities. Finally, the massive unmasking has an incredible defensive value for the bright future. Your incredible victory firmly creates a powerful deterrent. People who clearly see exactly what happened to your greedy opponents will definitely think twice before ever crossing similar lines. In short, the physical estate was only the bait. The true, real catch was the absolute truth beautifully revealed and the permanent, massive change in exactly how people view real power, true loyalty, and exactly who truly belongs. The total unmasking is the beautiful legacy that will absolutely outlast any property deed or temporary bank balance. Number 11. Your win activated a chain reaction of criminal exposure. Your massive victory didn't just quietly close the legal case. It powerfully lit a massive fuse that absolutely no one could defuse. The second the final verdict was proudly read in your favor, the massive ripple effect began completely immediately. Every single fraudulent document, every completely forged signature, and every desperate attempt to totally manipulate the final outcome now quickly became a glowing trail of hard evidence, pointing completely directly to the very people who originally orchestrated the ugly attacks against you. They truly thought the quiet courtroom would simply settle absolutely everything. They genuinely believed that once the final papers were officially signed and the heavy gavel finally hit, the dark storm would quickly pass. What they completely failed to deeply realize is that winning this case didn't merely protect your rightful inheritance. It aggressively triggered a massive chain reaction of total exposure that they could no longer control. Professional investigators absolutely do not operate in total isolation, and the strict law has an incredibly long memory. Actions deliberately taken to highly deceive or severely intimidate absolutely leave clear records, and those specific records are always patiently waiting for someone to finally connect the dots. Your massive win essentially handed the legal system a perfect map. Secret emails, hidden phone logs, shady bank transactions, and even totally casual admissions that were quietly recorded during the hearings instantly became glaring markers of intent. Exactly what had been deeply hidden or simply dismissed as circumstantial is now being heavily scrutinized in a way your terrified adversaries could not have ever predicted. Each new piece of evidence easily adds heavy weight to the next, and suddenly, the very people who truly believed they had completely finished their fight are finding themselves right under intense, crushing examination. The deep fear for them is definitely not hypothetical. Serious prosecutors, smart auditors, and sometimes even heavy federal investigators always follow the patterns. When a massive case uncovers a dark network of dirty lies, deep corruption, or heavily forged documents, it absolutely doesn't just stop quietly at the courtroom door. It quickly spreads. One massive investigation quickly leads to another, and their completely careful plans totally crumble, just like falling dominoes. Exactly what they desperately tried to control is now completely controlling them. They are now being actively forced to respond to serious subpoenas, hard questions, and deep evidence trails that they once truly thought would totally vanish. Their fake confidence completely erodes because every single day brings fresh scrutiny, totally new documents, and fresh witnesses who gladly fill in the specific gaps they desperately tried to leave entirely blank. This massive chain reaction also beautifully serves as a loud warning. Their desperate attempt to completely disinherit you and carefully hide their massive misconduct now completely illuminates absolutely everything for the strict authorities and for absolutely anyone watching. Your fierce persistence completely made it absolutely impossible for them to quietly sweep their massive wrongdoing right under the rug. Winning the massive inheritance didn't just beautifully restore exactly what was yours. It aggressively activated a strict system that will absolutely follow completely through on exactly what true justice requires. Every single false step they ever took, every dark manipulation they desperately attempted, is now firmly part of a sequence they simply can't stop. And that specific sequence is aggressively accelerating with every single new investigation that perfectly confirms exactly what you already knew. Their fake victory was absolutely never meant to be, and right now, the severe consequences are completely unavoidable. Number 12. They wanted to bury you but unearthed themselves. Every single dark move they made to try to completely erase you only massively strengthened the solid case directly against them. They truly thought intense intimidation would quickly break your resolve, that severe threats and heavy pressure would finally push you to just settle, and that completely false accusations and fully fabricated witnesses would easily make the absolute truth completely disappear. But in harsh reality, every single act purposely designed to quietly silence you quickly became rock-solid evidence. Every single ugly lie, every desperate phone call, and every heavily manipulated signature quickly created a massive paper trail that serious investigators could easily follow. In desperately trying to fully bury you, they ended up completely exposing themselves. Their very own dirty actions became the exact proof that they had aggressively operated with deep deceit and terrible intent. What is truly remarkable is exactly how completely transparent real desperation can actually be. The more they desperately tried to forcefully control the fake narrative, the more they constantly left massive traces that simply couldn't be hidden. They purposefully created fake witnesses who wildly contradicted themselves under heavy scrutiny, eagerly sent secret emails that perfectly revealed the deep coordination of their lies, and heavily manipulated legal documents that basic forensic analysis could completely and immediately challenge. Absolutely all the frantic energy they completely spent attempting to forcefully remove you from the family story quickly became a glaring record of their very own massive wrongdoing. Each specific shovel they quickly picked up to forcefully bury you only dug so much deeper into their very own dark culpability. Their desperate effort to totally erase you didn't just slightly fail. It backfired absolutely spectacularly. Instead of somehow creating any doubt about your complete legitimacy, they perfectly created absolute certainty about their massive guilt. Top legal experts, smart investigators, and even completely neutral parties could instantly see straight through the thick layers of pure fabrication because the very frantic attempts to actively suppress you were entirely inconsistent, completely traceable, and totally intentional. Each dark tactic they truly thought would magically help them ended up massively magnifying their serious crimes. By the time the massive case officially concluded, the sweet irony was completely undeniable. They had heavily invested long years desperately trying to quietly hide their actions. Yet, their dark schemes were now completely exposed in completely full view. Absolutely everything that was firmly meant to totally eliminate your rightful claim quickly became a glowing record of their very own moral and massive legal failures. In aggressively attempting to totally silence you, they effectively made themselves absolutely impossible to ignore. Their fake credibility completely collapsed, and the busy courtroom literally became a very public place where their very own dirty deeds were proudly laid bare. Absolutely not yours. In the very end, their greedy desire to forcefully bury you quickly became a glowing testament to their very own deep corruption. Every single severe threat, ugly lie, and dark manipulation is now rock-solid evidence directly against them. The much deeper they desperately tried to dig, the far more visible their massive wrongdoing completely became. You didn't just proudly survive their vicious attacks. You completely revealed them for exactly who they really were, perfectly turning their very own desperate efforts straight into the exact instruments of their total undoing. Their very own shovel literally became their very own legal noose, and your beautiful victory perfectly ensured it tightened without any mercy. Number 13. Your ancestors got the last word through you. This massive, intense battle was absolutely not only about you. It was the powerful continuation of a deep story that originally began long before you were ever even born. Every single desperate attempt to violently erase your rightful claim, every completely forged signature, and every heavily manipulated document was definitely not just a direct attack on you personally. It was a vicious attempt to fully silence entirely generations of people who had previously been cruelly denied real justice. Your fierce fight beautifully became the exact channel through which all those completely suppressed voices finally spoke out loud. The loud courtroom became so much more than just a typical place for standard legal arguments. It beautifully became the sacred space where the loud echoes of your proud ancestors forcefully demanded total acknowledgement, and where the deep truth, long violently buried, finally demanded to be fully seen. Every single time you proudly presented solid evidence, fiercely refuted ugly lies, or proudly stood entirely firm right under massive pressure, it wasn't simply your own deep knowledge or personal skill actively at play. It was the massive, invisible weight of an entire proud lineage strongly supporting you. There is a deep, profound sense of perfect timing in these amazing victories that goes so far beyond basic legal strategy. It feels completely, almost perfectly guided. Exactly as if powerful, invisible hands were gently nudging the massive events straight into perfect alignment. The vital documents you proudly produced, the brave witnesses who finally spoke the absolute truth, the deep clarity you beautifully maintained right under intense scrutiny, absolutely all of it perfectly seemed to respond to something so much larger than just the present, fleeting moment. It was the absolute, total culmination of many years, long decades, and perhaps even long centuries of terrible injustice being beautifully, finally corrected straight through your brave actions. Proudly winning the massive case didn't just perfectly secure the physical inheritance. It powerfully sent a massive message that the amazing story of your proud family absolutely cannot be violently rewritten by greedy opportunists. Every single totally false narrative that was sneakily introduced straight into that court was completely and utterly dismantled. And absolutely each beautiful victory inside that busy courtroom perfectly reinforced a much deeper, powerful truth, which is the amazing legacy of your proud ancestors is completely intact. Their intense, painful struggles, which were sadly silenced in their own life, beautifully found total expression strictly in your amazing persistence. The final, beautiful verdict wasn't solely yours. It was completely theirs too. Finally, beautifully acknowledged and totally restored. This deep, profound connection beautifully gives the massive victory a powerful resonance that goes so far entirely beyond basic material gain. The massive inheritance you proudly claimed absolutely wasn't just purely financial. It was deeply spiritual and heavily historical. By fiercely standing your absolute ground, you beautifully became the powerful vessel exactly through which true justice powerfully flowed backward and completely forward, strictly in time. It powerfully affirmed that deep legacy, absolute truth, and basic dignity simply cannot be permanently, violently stolen. And that exactly when the specific moment is perfectly right, the truly rightful heirs, whether currently living or long gone, will absolutely be loudly heard. In the absolute end, the massive case wasn't merely just a basic legal battle. It was a powerful, intense reckoning that beautifully bridged entirely generations. You absolutely didn't just powerfully win for exactly yourself. You proudly carried the massive weight of your entire proud lineage and beautifully delivered the absolute final word your proud ancestors had been patiently waiting to finally speak. Every single fake signature maliciously forged directly against you quickly became the perfect cue for total justice to actively respond, and the beautiful final verdict loudly reverberated far beyond the physical courtroom, echoing powerfully completely across the generations that had been patiently waiting for this exact perfect moment. Number 14. The real inheritance was becoming untouchable. The absolute true prize of this massive, intense case absolutely wasn't the physical property, the actual money, or the fancy titles. It was the profound, total transformation that beautifully occurred right inside of you. Every single harsh challenge, every completely forged document, and every vicious attempt to violently intimidate or violently erase you perfectly served to fully harden absolutely something that literally cannot ever be violently taken away. By the absolute time the final, beautiful verdict was officially read, you absolutely weren't just a basic heir actively reclaiming physical assets. You had completely become untouchable. Your proud presence, your fierce persistence, and your absolute refusal to ever bow down beautifully created a massive state of being that absolutely no ugly lie, no dark manipulation, and no violent threat could ever shake. That is a profound form of real inheritance that is far more totally valuable than absolutely any physical house or basic bank account, purely because it simply cannot be violently confiscated, sneakily hidden, or violently stolen. Many people very often totally mistake a basic victory for simply winning temporary material gains. But absolute true victory is strictly when your very existence, your massive influence, and your deep integrity entirely become completely impervious. Those greedy people who desperately tried to totally manipulate the legal system to forcefully erase you quickly discovered far too entirely late that you had completely moved far beyond the basic reach of their dirty strategies. Every single dark scheme they desperately attempted completely bounced right off your iron resolve. Every single ugly lie they carefully constructed completely fell totally apart directly under intense scrutiny. And absolutely every single dirty intimidation tactic only perfectly highlighted their absolute total weakness, directly compared to your massive strength. You beautifully became absolute proof that real power isn't ever freely given. It is deeply, painfully earned through absolute endurance, massive insight, and the absolute refusal to ever be violently silenced. This profound, untouchable state is definitely also a massive form of true defense. The very greedy people who violently sought to completely remove you directly from the family narrative are completely now totally unable to ever threaten your beautiful legacy. Your proud name, your solid claim, and your amazing story are perfectly secure. not exactly because others kindly allowed it, but purely because you aggressively forced it. They're dirty little games carefully designed to violently trap or violently suppress you, literally have completely no effect whatsoever anymore. You are proudly operating directly from a totally elevated space, strictly where basic manipulation entirely fails, and their massive deep fear of you is completely now far more completely real than absolutely any basic financial loss they may have directly suffered. Beautifully inheriting this absolute immunity completely changes all the basic rules entirely permanently. You can beautifully navigate through life perfectly with the solid confidence that your strong core absolutely cannot be secretly undermined. You are definitely no longer playing a cheap game that they secretly control. You have completely rewritten the rules perfectly through your brave action, fierce persistence, and the rock-solid, unshakable knowledge of your very own massive worth. That beautiful transformation, meaning the absolute ability to be totally untouchable, perfectly in the face of deep deceit, dark corruption, and violent aggression, is the absolute true inheritance that completely cannot ever be measured, taxed, or violently transferred. It is totally yours entirely alone, and it perfectly guarantees that absolutely no future desperate attempt to forcefully erase you will actually ever fully succeed. You have beautifully become the true legacy itself, completely untouchable and entirely undeniable. This massive, intense inheritance case was absolutely never just deeply about basic property, massive wealth, or a simple legal victory. It was an absolute reckoning, a massive revelation, and a profound, total transformation, all beautifully rolled completely into one. Every single intense challenge you bravely faced, every completely forged fake signature, and absolutely every dark manipulation by exactly those who deeply thought they could forcefully erase you, only perfectly strengthened your rock-solid position and completely revealed the total, absolute true nature of absolutely everyone desperately opposing you. You absolutely didn't just fiercely reclaim exactly what was proudly yours. You perfectly exposed dark corruption, beautifully unmasked greedy opportunists, and completely restored a massive legacy that had been directly threatened for many generations. Your beautiful victory powerfully rewrote family history, perfectly proved your solid, rightful place, and effectively activated massive consequences that will surely follow absolutely everyone who viciously sought to deeply deceive you for many long years to completely come. In the beautiful, intense process, you powerfully inherited so much more than basic material wealth. You successfully inherited the absolute, undeniable authority to strictly assert the absolute truth, the massive resilience to beautifully withstand dirty attacks, and the completely untouchable strength that perfectly comes directly from proudly standing completely firmly against dark, total injustice. Your proud ancestors' suppressed voices finally found total expression completely through your fierce persistence. Your intense, heavy fight beautifully became a strong channel for long-suppressed absolute justice. And your ultimate, beautiful triumph completely became a massive lesson that absolutely some intense battles are definitely never actually about just the basic, immediate prize. They are totally about fiercely redefining true power, total loyalty, and absolute integrity. Those greedy, dark people who desperately tried to violently bury you only totally unearthed themselves. And absolutely every single terrible act of dark deception they purposely committed is entirely now completely part of the very permanent public record of their very own total failure. At the very end of the total day, this profound, massive victory completely transformed you strictly into exactly someone who simply cannot be violently silenced, completely erased, or ever totally defeated again. You completely turned a basic legal battle exactly into a massive demonstration of pure resilience, a deep study of ugly human greed, and a perfect blueprint for exactly how absolute truth completely and totally ultimately entirely prevails. The whole world completely now perfectly sees exactly what greedy others desperately tried to violently hide, meaning your massive legitimacy, your massive strength, and your completely untouchable public position. Exactly what they totally mistook precisely for a simple inheritance of basic assets was absolutely exactly the total inheritance of true authority, deep clarity, and completely unstoppable power. So beautifully remember perfectly this. Proudly winning the massive case didn't simply quietly close a basic chapter. It powerfully opened a massive, entirely new legacy. Your amazing story absolutely isn't just mainly about bravely reclaiming exactly what was previously stolen. It is entirely about perfectly becoming completely undeniable, absolutely unbreakable, and totally unshakable. Your profound, beautiful victory is a massive, permanent marker perfectly stating that absolute truth, fierce persistence, and a totally rightful claim will absolutely always completely outlast ugly lies, basic greed, and dirty manipulation. You proudly stood, you bravely fought, and you totally transformed absolutely not just exactly your own beautiful present, but the massive history and completely bright future of your entire proud lineage. If this powerful true story deeply inspired you, hit that subscribe button perfectly so you literally notice a simple moment of deep truth and profound revelation. Smash the like button strictly if you are truly ready to proudly see real justice totally served, and absolutely do not hold completely back. Comment straight below perfectly with your powerful thoughts, true reactions, or real experiences. Kindly share this specific video entirely with absolutely anyone who deeply needs to properly witness exactly how fierce persistence, absolute truth, and deep courage can completely overturn absolutely even the most seemingly impossible dark battles. Your strong support completely helps the specific channel strictly keep fiercely exposing exactly the hidden, perfectly revealing exactly the untold, and proudly celebrating huge victories that completely and totally change absolutely everything. God richly bless you. Amen.